guys, welcome back to another Mysteries Over Drinks. My name is Des if you're new here. If you're not, hi, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about an unsolved murder mystery in the Los Angeles area. I feel like we all have heard the Black Dahlia, but there were so many strange murder mysteries that were going on back in the 40s, and so many young women with like the same dreams and kind of the same story ended up just dying on their move to the Los Angeles area. Today's drink is water from a mason jar. Okay, so today's story is going to be about Georgette Bauerdorf. So Georgette was born on May 6th in 1924 in New York City to George Frederick Bauerdorf and Constance Donhauser. George was an oil tycoon, so they had a very wealthy lifestyle, obviously, and they just grew up well. Her sister, she had an older sister, her name was Connie, or Constance, after her mom, and they both attended St. Agatha's School for Girls while they were living in New York City. Unfortunately, no matter how much money you have, tragedy strikes, and her mother passed away in 1935, and that was when the family actually decided to move to Los Angeles, and that's where she attended Marlboro School and Westlake School for Girls. While she was in Los Angeles, she discovered her love and passion for wanting to be an actress, and that's when she moved to Hollywood in August of 1944. So she was living in Los Angeles. I believe that her father and her sister, her sister moved back to the East Coast, and she kind of stayed behind. She moved into this pretty good, like, fancy luxury apartment building, which I have written down here, and it was called the El Palacio Apartments at 8493 Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood. So that's a very nice area, especially back in the 40s. While she was living there, she got a job working at the Hollywood Canteen. So the Hollywood Canteen was this like converted bar into like a space where servicemen, because this was during World War II, they could come kind of unwind, and Betty Davis was there, Shirley Temple was there. But with all of these servicemen, they needed to hire more people, so they hired a lot of girls to just be hostesses. This wasn't a job where you got paid, but obviously she had the means to just volunteer to be a hostess. So what that included would be like dancing with the servicemen, just, entertaining them, and also kind of cleaning up. So, just a regular hostess. But it was only for men who were in the army, and she was a very conservative girl, so there was nothing like weird going on there as far as you could tell. But she was always very she was known to be very giving and just like willing to help men who were serving our country. That was kind of like her feeling like she was giving back and doing her part for the war effort. So if she ever saw like a serviceman hitchhiking, or if like they would invite her to dinner, she would always like politely say yes. And though she was very conservative, like she was always willing and able to be open to go out to dinner or dance with the servicemen and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind as we go through the story. Alright, so on the day before her murder, Georgette had gone out to cash a check for $175 to purchase a ticket, an airline ticket, to go to El Paso, Texas to visit her then soldier boyfriend, Jerome M. Brown. And he had met her when he was in Hollywood at the canteen on June 13th. And shortly thereafter, he was actually deployed to El Paso. So this was going to be the first time that they were going to get to see each other and be in each other's company again after quite some time. But on that day, she was going to work to the canteen, and according to her friend June, June also worked at the canteen with her. She was also a host, but according to her friend June, she had arrived at the parking lot and she saw Georgette in her car. She looked very anxious and she was actually like knitting in her car. So June went up to her, and it is said that Georgette said she was feeling nervous and kind of anxious, and June actually thought that it was just because, you know, she was about to go on this like plane ride to El Paso. So maybe she had some like jitters about how she was feeling as far as traveling. And actually, Georgette had asked June if she could possibly stay at her house that night. But then for some reason, I don't know if June said no, or I couldn't find that little piece of information, she didn't end up staying with her. So now I wonder if like June ever thinks or like thought back at the time, like did Georgette know something was gonna happen that night? Is that why she wanted to stay over? Should she have maybe pushed her more to come stay at her house? Not saying that it was June's fault, but like, do you like, if that was me, I think I would always wonder, like, did she know something was gonna happen? But aside from that, they went into work and they got down to business pretty much. They danced. Georgette was said to be seen having like a good time dancing with the servicemen, as she usually did. But there was this one guy who was at the club, and witnesses say that he seemed to be like interrupting her with whatever guy that she was dancing with. So if she was dancing with somebody other than him, he would go up and kind of interrupt them. So like I said, Georgette was a very conservative girl, and she didn't really like to do the jitterbug. She thought that was kind of like a risque dance, and she didn't feel comfortable doing it. But this guy that wanted to like interrupt her over and over, he really wanted to dance the jitterbug with her. And in some reports or some articles I read, it said that she kind of politely obliged because she didn't want trouble. In one other article I read, it said that she kind of declined. But if the case is, I'm just going to say that he interrupted her to do the jitterbug, and she did it just because she didn't want to start anything. Anyway, the night goes on and she dances with him and she dances with everyone. Around 10:30, like 10:15, 10:30, around that time span is when June and Georgette actually leave the canteen after a night of dancing and entertaining the servicemen. And to keep this in mind, because this is going to come in handy later. So the canteen doesn't allow the girls to leave the club with servicemen. They can't go home with them. They can't like have them drive them home, stuff like that. June says that she sees Georgette leave the canteen by herself. She gets into her car and she leaves. And that is pretty much the last time anyone was ever going to see her alive. So after this, the information gets a little foggy, just because obviously we don't know what happened. But as far as what the investigation says, we think that Georgette got home, she ate a can of green beans because that's what was in the autopsy, and they also found a can of green beans that had been discarded into the garbage cans. She is said to either try to go to bed, or somebody at this point came in and attacked her. The next day, on October 12th, this man and woman who were maid and janitor for the apartment complex that she lived in came in because they were going to clean her apartment, and they came into her apartment and they get to the bathroom where they see Georgette is in the bathtub and it's overflowing, and she was kind of face down in it. And she also had a gag in her mouth, or like a rag. So obviously they call the police and the murder investigation begins. So it is believed that somebody was either inside her apartment, or they had been waiting for her outside, or they came knocking after she ate her dinner or snack, and she let them in. So some of these theories just don't add up and don't necessarily make sense just because of the type of girl that Georgette was. So like I said, she was very conservative, and she didn't really like to, she wasn't like a party girl kind of person. And she, although she did date a lot of like men while she was working at the canteen, she kept all of their names and all of their information in a date book. So it wasn't like she had so many partners that you couldn't narrow it down to a list. But she also didn't like to invite strangers into her home. A lot of people said, like a lot of her close friends said, that she didn't let men into her apartment and stuff like that. So the idea that somebody came knocking and she let them in doesn't really add up. But here are some of the theories. So the theory of somebody lying in wait and maybe it was like a robbery gone wrong kind of gets thrown out of the window when they conduct a full investigation, and like a bunch of very valuable jewelry and money is kind of still left over. Even though we don't know the exact amount of money that Georgette carried in her purse or anything, we still can't say that it was necessarily a robbery or like money motivated attack, because there were so many valuables left behind that it's hard to believe that this person just murdered her and left all this stuff behind and didn't even take anything. So some other theories and suspects are that obviously somebody might have taken her home. One of these servicemen took her home and dropped her off and then returned as she was getting ready for bed to kill her. This doesn't make sense because June said that she saw her leaving the club alone, and also even though rules can be broken, it was unlikely that she would break that rule after leaving the canteen. There's also a neighbor that wanted to remain anonymous, and he actually told the sheriff's captain that he was awoken by screams at around 2:30 a.m. and it sounded like it was coming from her apartment. And he said that he also heard a female voice yelling, "Stop, stop, you're killing me," which is obviously very strange. He said soon that the screaming and the yelling kind of just stopped and he was able to go back to bed. He assumed that it was just like a family argument or like a domestic dispute, so he didn't think too much of it. Another thing was obviously that they found her date book, and it had all the names and like contact information for all of these servicemen that she had gone out with. So the army willingly joined the sheriff's department in helping them kind of connect these servicemen with the sheriffs in hopes that either somebody saw her leaving with someone that maybe just June missed, or maybe somebody knew something. There was also a lot of letters that Georgette would get from these servicemen that were heavily scrutinized by police because obviously they were like love letters, and they felt like maybe there was some kind of unrequited love that was left there jealous and angry. And then if we remember back to the night of her death, the guy who kept cutting and wanting to get her attention was obviously being looked into. So the police kind of put it in the papers that they were looking for this dark-haired husky GI, and he actually came forward to the police and he came to talk to them. When he saw that headline, he told them that he really did like Georgette, but that despite what people were saying, she was very interested in him. She didn't mind dancing with him. She wasn't annoyed by him, and that she had a really good time. And that was pretty much it. He taught her how to dance, and That was it. His name was Cosmo Volpe, and he also let authorities know that he had left the club at around 10:30, 10:45, and that he had also checked back into the barracks at Lockheed Air Terminal at 11 p.m. So as far as we know, he didn't leave the barracks after that, and I'm sure that the Army would have some sort of information on that, but he was cleared after he came forward and let them know. And especially since the Army was so willing to help them try to solve this case, I'm pretty sure if he had more involvement, they would have figured out that he had left, but it's still a possibility that Cosmo had something to do with it. So another theory or suspect is that June had told the sheriff's office that Georgette had been dating this serviceman. He was really tall. He was about 6'4", and they were dating, but even though that this guy was like very interested in Georgette, she just didn't feel the same way about him. So she actually stopped going out with him, and maybe he felt like she kind of led him on, and maybe he was angry about that. But I was never able to find if they were able to find this man. I wasn't able to find any names or anything, but he was sought out by the sheriff's office for questioning. I wasn't able to find if they were able to find him. So another person who came forward to give them some more information about Georgette was Rose Gilbert, and Rose Gilbert was Georgette Bauerdorf's secretary, and she had actually stayed behind even though the rest of the family had gone back to New York City. She stayed behind in Los Angeles kind of as a friend and just to be there for Georgette. So she said, like I told you guys before, she was very conservative. She had gone to all girl schools and to convent schools, so she kind of had this like idea of what being proper was. She never entertained men alone at her apartment, and when she did go on dates with these men, obviously back then men would come pick you up, and maybe she would ask them to come in briefly, just like if she was still getting ready, if she needed to grab something, so they wouldn't be out there waiting for her. But she never let them in and never let them stay. So she felt that the idea that she would ever let somebody come in and stay and give them the opportunity felt very off and strange, and it just couldn't be a possibility. So at the start of this investigation, they thought, well, maybe she just drowned, because they were kind of losing traction on who could have killed her because they just weren't finding anybody. But at the coroner's request, he said that it was definitely a homicide and that they needed to apprehend their killer. So as the investigation continued at the request of the coroner as a homicide, Fred came forward. Fred was the janitor who actually found Georgette with his wife, who was the maid, and he said that he heard shuffling, and he swears that it was coming from Georgette's apartment. He heard shuffling and then a big loud bang. He also said that he believes that Georgette was alone when she got home, and he doesn't think there was anybody with her as she came in the door or anything. So Fred said that she was alone, and he believes that she entered alone as well. There was this letter that also came in to the sheriff's department from this serviceman who was hitchhiking on Sunset Boulevard. He was hitchhiking, and he says that Georgette had picked him up. Like I said, she was very into helping servicemen, and she felt like that was the least she could do for everything they were doing for the country. So he said that he was picked up by Georgette, and she seemed very excited. She was supposed to get a call from Jerry, who was the guy she was going to visit in El Paso, and she was just very excited to get home to have this call and go visit him soon. So no one really knows who did this, but it was horrific. She was found naked in her overflowing tub face down with a rag in her mouth. Obviously, I don't think it was suicide. It didn't look like an accident, and it's very sad that this young woman was robbed of a life for probably something very just small and not important. But that is the story of Georgette Bauerdorf. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you like these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. And we have one more mysteries over drinks before Halloween, and then we're gonna do something super fun on Halloween night. So that is pretty much it. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys next time.